Why don't we start over here with introductions, Milo?
Milo Denham, citizen member.
Kathy Heisey, City Councilor.
Lisa Beatty, City Councilor.
Rhoda Park, City Councilor.
John Stahl, Citizen Chair.
Mary Rose, Citizen Member.
Angel Falconer, City Council.
Peter Passarelli, Public Works Director.
Hi, Bonnie Dennis, Finance Director, and I also like to introduce Dave Peterson, the Assistant Finance Director. He's new.
Hi.
Yeah.
Welcome.
Ann Ober, City Manager.
Vince Alvarez, CUAB Chair.
And then the mayor has just arrived and is on his way to sit next to John.
First order of business is the approval of the November 19th, 2080 committee meeting minutes.
I didn't see anything that needed to be corrected. I'll make a motion to accept.
I'll second.
Moved and seconded on the passing the minutes. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. We're going to move on to the CUAB and Budget Committee joint meeting.
If you're okay, I'm going to do an introduction. So over the last couple of months, we've had discussions about which roles fall to which boards. And so rather than doing that independently, we decided to pull both of the boards together. So we have Chair Alvarez from the CUAB here with us tonight. And then we also had met with Chair Stoll from the Budget Committee and talked just about, in general, the CIP process, who hears what at which points. And then the team has also done some modifications to our own CIP process going into the next budget cycle that we'd like to run by the group to make sure that everything's really transparent. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Bonnie.
Okay, actually, Peter.
Peter.
Thank you, Bonnie. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the purpose of the CUAB and put everything into some context. So the CUAB was formed to advise the council on utility rates for the city and also to review and provide input on the capital improvement program. And they were set up to basically review the rate structures and programs for our utilities. So our water, wastewater, storm, and transportation utilities. And they were also developed to help promote general knowledge and public understanding of our utility programs that we have in the city. The appointment of the board are made by the mayor with the consent of the council, and there's 5 at-large members that either live, own a business, or pay a utility rate. One of the things that the Citizen Utility Advisory Board does is take a look at the rates. Currently, right now, we're going through a process to review our water and wastewater rates, and we're looking at a 5-year financial projection and targets that look at our debt coverage ratio, minimum cash that we have in each of those utilities, and then a target operating income. In addition to that, we're doing a cost of service study on those 2 utilities to look at the rate structure for each of those 2 utilities in terms of the monthly customer charge and the usage charge for each of those utilities. So we've hired a utility rate consultant to put together that study. And in early January, the CUAB met and we reviewed the initial draft of that cost of service study and rate projections. And the CUAB had a few questions and asked the consultant to provide some additional input. And we'll be reviewing those again in March at our March CUAB meeting as well. So those action items that they're working on right now include, taking a look at our utility funds for that fiscal soundness and provide a rate recommendation to the council. So as I mentioned, the CUAB is going to look at the rates once again in March of this year. And then we're going to have a workshop, I think it's at the Works Council work session, April 2nd, to discuss the water and wastewater recommendations with City Council, and the consultant will be there at that meeting to provide part of that discussion. One of the other things that the CUAB does as well is reviews the implementation of the adopted biennial capital improvement plan. Last year, I think it was in 2017, during the fall and winter of 2017, the CUAB worked with the engineering staff and public works staff to develop the CIP. And then they met in the late winter of 2018 to review and make recommendations related to the utility adjustments to capture that capital improvement plan as well. So our plan in the upcoming year is to begin working with the CUAB, the engineering department, public works, and develop the capital improvement plan for the next biennium budget, with the goal to have a final draft presented to a joint committee of the CUAB and the budget committee, targeted for February of 2020. In addition to that, the Engineering and Public Works Department are working on updating our master plans for our water and wastewater utilities. Currently, right now, we're finalizing the fee structure on the water master plan. And I believe we'll have that coming to council for approval at the March 5th regular session. And then I've got RFQs that are due February, or this Friday, actually, on the wastewater master plan. And we'll begin work on those as well shortly after that.
So before we leave the CUAB piece, I did want to just talk a little bit about the capital improvement plan and how that is built, so that everybody in the room is on the same page about what, oh, you've got that?
We've got a follow-on slide at the end if you wanted to.
I can hold.
I'm going to talk a little bit about the Budget Committee and the roles that the Budget Committee plays. The Budget Committee is a requirement per Oregon local budget law. It is required by cities to have a committee, and that committee consists of City Council as well as an equal number of citizen members appointed by City Council. In accordance with Oregon local budget law, the Budget Committee's objective is to basically hold one-on-one meetings to review the budget message and the budget document, as well as provide members of the public with an opportunity to ask any questions or comments during the budget process, and then also to approve the proposed budget document as submitted by the budget officer or revised by the Budget Committee. But additionally, here at the City of Milwaukee, the budgeting process is really a year-long process. So we hold quarterly meetings, such as this one, and at those quarterly meetings, we discuss the quarterly financial project reporting and monitoring. We also discuss any supplemental budgets or any budget transfers. We'll discuss periodic updates and discussions, and then also the 5-year financial forecast is usually discussed at least at one point during that fiscal year, and then any education and training that we may have. So approving the budget, we approved, the Budget Committee as well as City Council adopted the budget this last year for the fiscal year 2019. We do a 2-year budget. It's a biennium budget. Those budget hearings consist of several meetings, and they are there for the introduction to the budget document. The budget message gets presented by Ann. The fund and departments also do a budget presentation. They discuss their expenditures that they plan to foresee in the next 2 years. And then also we have a discussion over the capital improvement plan, which outlines the capital projects for the next 5 years. So once the Budget Committee reviews the proposed budget and then considers any of the comments from the public, they will approve the budget, which is basically recommending the budget to City Council. From there, City Council will then adopt at a regular meeting the budget.
So a little bit on how the budget and the CIP link together, and Bonnie talked about the adoption of the CIP in conjunction with the budget. But generally, we start working on the CIP or making revisions to our CIP, that 5-year CIP, the fall prior to the adoption of the new budget. So in this case, this fall, we'll begin reviewing our CIP, see what projects might need revised or updated, reprioritized to make sure that they're fitting the needs of the community.
Can you talk a little bit about where those projects come from?
So a majority of those projects come from our master plans, our utility master plans. They come from economic development needs related from our community development department. And they also come from some of the regulatory requirements and mandates that we get from the federal government in terms of making sure that we're taking care of our drinking water systems and wastewater systems to make sure that we're compliant with the law. So that's where the majority of those projects come from, as well as our TSP and I'm trying to think what stormwater master plan as well.
And then
some of
SAFE
those-
was the piece that was added in this last time, which was a unique new program where we took a public process, prioritized the routes based on the community input, and then council approved those through the through the delivery, basically, of the full fee over 25 years, I believe, that we condensed down to 9 years' worth of bonding. Go for it.
I was just going to say that a lot of the things on the CIP have been on there for many, many years, and the wastewater and, stormwater and stuff. But what Ann just said brought me to a question. So your initial slide said that the CUAB was responsible for, wastewater, stormwater, water, and transportation. But when it comes to CIP, is the CUAB responsible for transportation, or is the PSAC?
Well, in my experience from last year, it seemed that the CUAB reviewed and made recommendations on those projects from transportation-related projects and made recommendations on the rates associated with SSMP and the SAFE program.
So PSAC answered the policy question, CUAB answered the rate question, if that makes sense. And so that's part of why we wanted to talk about this today, is because typically the CIP is a conglomeration of a bunch of approved documents that council has adopted over time. And then we prioritize them based on what the requirements are in there, or the stated goals are within those documents. So it'll say within 5 years you need to have this pipe updated. So we will then work that into the CIP to be able to deliver that within the time frame. They then take that to CUAB, and CUAB looks at what the rate would need to be in order to deliver those, and whether or not there's a palatability to being able to deliver that full list. I think. So the piece where it broke down a little during the budget process was that we didn't provide a separate conversation around CIP. We lumped it into the department conversations, and I would prefer not to do that again this year. So our goal, though, is in order to allow CUAB to be able to set the rates, we need to have a policy conversation earlier than the budget committee would normally meet. And so what we're proposing on this schedule is that we would actually be bringing the budget committee together earlier this year, February, to have a discussion. So a year from now, we'd have our first budget meeting. It just wouldn't be the full presentation of the budget. We'd have it separated with a CIP conversation so that we could then go to CUAB about rates. Because the way it works right now is the rates already been set by the time budget is looking at it, and it feels a little disingenuous that there isn't as much ability for you to have a discussion about that document.
Okay.
Is that fair?
Yeah. The only other thing I would mention in terms of the rates too. So, the CIP, that capital improvement program, is just part of the rate structure for each of the utilities. There's an operational and maintenance component to that, and also a depreciation component. So you want to make sure that you're allocating resources for the future replacement of infrastructure as well. You want to make sure that's part of that rate structure, that you're capturing those dollars to do that. And that doesn't always line up with your capital improvement program because it's more out in the future.
The other piece, just before we move on from this, is Kelly Brooks would probably appreciate me saying the following. The place to influence the policy associated with these programs and projects is actually in the master planning process, not at the budget process, because by the time we've gotten to the budget process, you all have adopted all of those documents, and we're now into an implementation phase. So I would also remind people to take those documents very seriously as we're bringing before council for consideration and before CUAB like we're doing right now, because that's where we can move projects more than anywhere else. It gets really difficult once we have all those master plans adopted to have much flex in the CIP. Anything else you want? No, she's good.
So do we do any debt financing for these enterprise funds, or is it all out of revenues?
I believe for the most part, with the exception of some wastewater debt, it's all been out of the revenues, sort of pay as you go.
So
We are looking at taking some debt out that I'll disclose to you guys now for the MEEK project. What was approved in the CIP project was only phase one of that process. Council has agreed to allow us to look at a financing structure to bring IFA funding from the state to give us a short-term loan to cover phase one and phase two so that we can maximize the staff time and the design attributes of the project. We expect that those are going to be paid off, I believe, over 3 or 4 years. It's going to be a very short-term financing package. And we don't actually start paying on the debt of that until we are taking the money out. So we can sit on the loan for a while before we actually expend the dollars. And then the interest starts the moment that we start expending the dollars.
Well, Alma came to us about applying for that. Did we apply and get it?
We haven't applied. We are submitting that this week. So we will know more at that point. But the application is pulled together and staff is fully engaged on that. We've also met with the owners of the properties. Everybody's on the same page about that being an allowable push for them, that they can get on board. It requires us to possibly move one of our easements. Staff's coming to you on the 19th to discuss the movement of that easement. But typically, we do not take on debt.
So if someone were to want to advocate to use some debt financing, the CUAB would be the place to go.
I think that's the place to go.
In the budget we have now, we've got like 14 million of capital, and we're financing 10 million with cash.
Yes.
And so everyone's aware of that, and they're okay.
That's the place to do the push. They make recommendation to council, so council would be the place where the actual decision would be made about taking on additional debt.
Yeah, I don't think it's ever come before us where we've had to talk about that in the past. We never have taken on debt, so, that I can recall, for years.
So in one of the earlier drafts that the rate consultant had put together before I brought it to the CUAB, they had taken a look at if we needed, I asked them to take a look on the water and the wastewater side, if we needed to include debt to smooth out rate increases or prevent future rate increases being high. And he took a look at it, and at this point in time with the rate structure that we have in place and the capital improvement plan that we have, it's not necessary. So
I'm satisfied with that.
yeah.
That's good.
So that is really all we wanted to make sure that you were aware of today, is that we are looking for a way to build the two teams together through the budget process this next year. You'll see a little bit of a shift. We will be calling our first budget, we're adding a budget meeting, and we're calling that sooner than we would normally have called it, just to make sure that you do get a chance to review that document. And then once we come back, we will probably be very light on any CIP discussions going into the May meetings. Okay. So that was a big piece, but we did want to give you guys a chance to talk amongst the two of you, if you the two teams. CUAB has been incredible to work with. I know that Chuck really appreciated it, and Peter has said great things. The Budget Committee has been wonderful for the last 2 years of my time here, so thank you. Are there things, policy issues that you both would like to talk about tonight that we haven't addressed for you? Okay.
Like I say, I'm satisfied. Peter has talked with consultants on the outside. They've taken a look at our rates and think they're reasonable. It's like, okay.
Okay. Then what we'd like to do is we will be doing a letter probably back and forth during the budget process from CUAB, just saying that you've reviewed, Budget Committee, you've reviewed, just so that everybody's transparently talking about the same thing. And that's the shortest meeting ever for the CUAB. But I appreciate you coming. I think this was an important opportunity for at least the two bodies to come together. We do have a third finance body, that is our audit committee, but they are typically at the end of a project rather than at the upfront planning stage, so. Okay. Do you have any questions? Would you guys at least introduce yourselves before you head out?
I'm Ed Simmons. I'm on the CUAB.
I'm Laura Hanna. I'm a hydrogeologist.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And thanks for coming in for a short meeting tonight.
Sorry to be late.
No, you're great. We're going to take just a 2-minute break to allow everybody to disperse as they need to, and then we'll be back on air if that works.
Yep.
Does that work? Perfect. Thank you so much.
What else?
We're going to do a quick discussion.
Brownies are pretty good.
End of the week, I'm going out and working on my own.
Everything we see that's...
Peanut butter ones are a little thick. Right, yeah, the gap here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have almost like
Right, if you could.
measures.
Yeah, you zoomed in here?
Okay.
And then all the things that we're trying to do to sell them over the
Thanks, you guys.
Yeah. Take care.
Great.
Budget transfer discussion?
Yeah. Do you want to start it?
Sure. So we have a couple of budget transfers to discuss this evening. Just to give you an update, we did talk about some budget transfers at the last meeting. Those did get approved by City Council. So these next two are just more current ones that we have come up with that we'll discuss a little bit more in detail here shortly. So we wanted to bring them to you. Ann's got the first one with the.
Sure. So the first one was actually a discussion about the railroad, and unfortunately, I don't need to move money right now. And I'm going to just.
Unfortunately, what? I'm
I
sorry.
actually don't need the move after all. So I'm going to talk through what's happened and where we are, and then also talk about how I'd like to handle this in the coming months. So last year, the deadline for the grant was July. This year, it's March 6th, and we're not ready. I've been in communication with Representative Power. She was the person who was trying to secure the funding from the railroads to use as the match. We have not received a declaration as to what that amount is. There's an off chance, there's a very small chance I may still need the funding this year. They'll be able to pull together a pot of funds, and if so, then this stands. I don't need a budget adjustment tonight to do it, but I did want to make sure I was really transparent that I will need one at a future date to be able to fill the budget that you've committed to. So the good news is that there is still a very active and interested group in trying to solve this. And I really wanted to note that Councilor Beatty and Councilor Heise and the mayor have all worked with me over the last year to try and figure out how we can help move this forward. Our partner who is at DEQ is no longer at DEQ, but also still very interested and willing to come to the table. So we've been talking to him. Kevin has been wonderful. And then Representative Power remains very interested in finding a solution that will reduce the air emissions in our neighborhoods from idling trains. We think that the package, I'm trying to remember, we thought it was like $120,000.
It's 140.
That we needed to raise. So the city's commitment was going to be between 20 and 25,000. We were asking the railroad to come in at 30 to 40,000, and we were looking for other pots of funds in that. We're going to keep doing that. One of the options is that we can try and centralize those funds and then transfer them at the point of a grant at a future date. So we'll keep talking to people over the course of the next few months to try and find more money from other agencies. If we go down this path where I can't make this grant round, but we can make a grant round a year later, we're going to keep this on our sort of tickler list of things that would come through for approval from this budget committee. I think that's about all I have, but I can answer questions if people want to talk about it.
Did Kevin confirm the March 6th date? Yeah.
Yes. So Kevin confirmed that, and he actually called me today. We met last week, and then we were supposed to talk today, and he called me and said, nothing's changed. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to get any further on what he was working on, and so we're just at a standstill until we can get some movement.
Is it time to start putting some more pressure on the railroad?
It may be. Part of this is that Representative Power was leading sort of our team. She's been embroiled in some big conversations at the state. I just don't think that she's as focused on this right now as we would need her to be to hit that date. And she's working on the important things. I don't want to undermine those things. They're really critical too. So we don't have an answer today, but I think she's still very interested, and I think we just need to reconvene the team and keep working forward. Whether or not she wants to change the political trajectory is up to the people in the room and to her.
I want to make sure that we note that it's not just a problem in Island Station. I'm
Yeah.
hearing from neighbors in Ardenwald, who, and I've forwarded a few of those, and I just want to make sure that those folks are being engaged as well, because the idling happens all day in my neighborhood as well, so.
No, that's really helpful. The conversations that we've been having have been primarily with Portland, with the Western line for this emissions, but I know that Kelly Brooks has been working on the rail question for both neighborhoods and has been working at both the state and the national level to try and reduce overall idling. I'm not sure if it's the age of the engines that are currently being used by UP. My guess is it is as to why they wouldn't be in the same predicament of needing this technology, but I can look at that.
Yeah, the PNWR locomotives are very old, whereas the UP ones tend to be only old.
So we're going to keep working on it. I don't think that this issue will ever go away. Even if we do get the technology, I think it continues to be an issue for the city of Milwaukee, and we'll keep tracking it and being involved as we can.
Because I do think there's an opportunity to try and get like Oswego to contribute as well, I'd be willing to go over and make a pitch to them. Because that, yeah.
Well, and I think that if this group is comfortable with it, I'd actually, because we haven't heard from Representative Power, I would recommend that the two counselors go out and start talking to some of the other agencies and seeing what you can round up. Even if they have money in this year's budget and they're worried about next year, we're happy to have the funds transferred to the city and to hold those until we actually hit the point, because we're on a biennium budget. We have a little more time. We have about 18 months. So we can make that work if that somehow helps them with their budget process.
I should mention that there is always a risk that the impetus for this is an EPA grant. There's always a risk that they will not renew offering this. So far, these funds have been fairly secure. Reducing emissions from locomotives seems to be something the EPA doesn't find as political as some of the other things it does, but that risk is there.
Yep.
Yeah, that assumes there still will be an EPA in another year.
I think that's what Kevin's email started with when he contacted me.
Yeah. No, we recognize that there is a need to do this sooner than later. We're just not at the point of having sufficient funding to do it, and the city can't do 140. So we're going to have to bring in partners to make it happen. So that's that budget adjustment. So the short answer is nothing's changing actually right now for my budget. I'm not planning on expending those dollars unless we ended up getting a phone call that said that the other money had been secured. We are doing budget adjustments though probably in June or in the fall. And so at that point, if it looks like something's moving, we can allocate funds at that time.
The second one is just a budget transfer. It's moving funds from the finance department into the city manager's department. So this is for the right-of-way contracts coordinator position. That during focusing on the department, it seemed better alignment for what Reba is working on to be in the city manager's department, to focus on those interagency policy discussions. So $277,000, that includes her salary, her benefits, as well as some other expenses that she had outlined in the budget process. That's getting all shifted over from finance to city manager. So that's the basics of that transfer.
And for budget committee members who don't know what's going on at the federal level and why that makes sense for now, is that the 5G discussions are happening at the FCC level and at congressional level. Reba is the head of NOAA, which is the organization here in Oregon that's focusing on these things. And she's doing that in large part because of our support of her and our interest in trying to tackle these issues. A lot of that work comes back to Kelly Brooks because she's doing our government affairs. And so they have a very good partnership around both at the state and the federal level, what needs to happen. And it makes some sense right now, especially as we've been shifting to Bonnie as a new director. Does that work?
Yep. Yep.
Okay.
I take it you need a motion on that? Or do we just?
No, actually, we don't need a vote on the budget transfers.
We do budget transfers as an opportunity for the budget committee to weigh in if there are any concerns so that they have a chance to speak to council before we present it to council.
Right.
Makes sense.
Okay. So if there's no other questions, I can move on to the quarterly report. Okay, so this is the quarterly report for the second quarter of fiscal year 2019. I'm going to go over the brief highlights. For the citywide funds, we're seeing a 69% increase from prior year. You can find this on page 1. This is primarily due to the transportation bonds. That's why we're seeing the increase. I did want to point out that revenues for property tax are received annually in November, and they are within budget. Franchise fees in the general fund are lower than anticipated for the second quarter. However, there's a majority of the franchise fees that are expected in the third quarter. So you see you'll see an uptake in the third quarter.
We've actually spoken with Reba Crocker, since she's the person who does the invoicing of those. She believes that they're all in transit, basically. She's not concerned that the budget won't be met.
So some more additional highlights. I wanted to point out that the interest for LGIP has gone up. We are at now 2.56%. This has increased from 2.25% from last quarter. So you'll see a little bit more revenue coming in for just interest alone. The library fund expenditures have definitely increased over the second quarter, and that's primarily due to the construction. State gas tax includes the $83,200 revenue that we have received so far from the new gas tax, and that's the year-to-date number.
Year-to-date on new only, not on the prior gas tax. Okay.
City Council approved the budget transfers that were reported in first quarter, so those budget transfers are reflected in this report. I also like to point out that we finished the audit for fiscal year 2018, and that was presented to City Council. So those audited financials are also included in this report as well. So I'm going to dig into the funds more specifically. If you go to the general fund on page 6 and 7.
Can we just talk about the FTE real quick?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
How are we doing on engineering?
Today is the day to ask. So we're doing great on our line staff. We haven't had any turnover since we were able to make this, secure all those positions. So we've brought on an incredible team. We do have someone out on leave, but they'll be returning, and the team's delivering very well. We've got the SAFE projects underway. Kronberg is going out to bid. The plaza is underway, as you can see, I'm sure, down at the end of Main Street. So things are actually coming online, and the team has been incredible. I can't say enough great things, actually, about our engineering team right now. They've really delivered. As you know, Chuck left in November, and so we've been looking for his replacement. We did hire someone, and it was not a fit. So we have both agreed it's not a fit, and so we actually are reposting the city engineer position today. And that position, we've actually decided to secure a headhunter firm to make sure that we get a person who is going to be the right fit and that position comes on quickly. But that's the only turnover we've had.
Okay.
Thanks.
And the city attorney is doing a great job. Thank you. He's wonderful. Thank you guys for hiring me. He's been a wonderful partner on everything.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so if there's any other questions on the staffing levels, I could speak to finance a little bit. We've had a little bit of turnover, but Dave is here. So that includes one of the FTE. We've been short-staffed for quite a while. So, and then we've also had 2 other employees in the front office downstairs that we've recently filled. So, and then outside of that, there's some other positions, but any questions on that?
Code enforcement, when do we go to full-time?
We went, actually, December 26th.
Okay, it's just not.
Yep. And he's doing a great job, too. We get rave reviews.
Okay, moving over to the general fund. We spoke a little bit about franchise fees and the property tax. A couple highlights I wanted to point out in the revenue section. Intergovernmental revenues, there's always a timing difference there. So you're typically going to always see that being shortly under under budget until we get those funds reimbursed to the city. Licenses and permits includes business registration revenue. Those have been coming in primarily in December. You'll definitely see licenses and permits have an uptick in the third quarter as we get through the renewal process in December and then also in January. So right now, every business is due to pay their business registration. So you're going to start seeing those revenues come up even more.
And we had some software problem.
We did have a
people couldn't
software.
renew online.
Right. So we did have a software issue this last year. So we did have to have paper applications submitted, and that includes a lot of checks processed. We are looking at a different software so that business owners can apply online next year, and we're definitely hoping not to go through the same thing next year. Yeah. So.
Is that Does that also account for numbers being lower, just that it's not as easy, so people aren't renewing as quickly as they might have?
Yeah, we definitely have had some folks that are behind on payment. There's not a change in the number of businesses in the city, but definitely some folks have not paid on time because it likely do, and we do have a bit of a grace period that we have accounted for it.
Right.
Yeah.
I put mine off. Oh, I got to print paper out? I'll wait a month on that. It's almost due now, I better do it.
So moving on, interest revenue. I had spoken a little bit about the interest being increased in this last quarter. It's not a lot, but it is a little bit, everything a little bit counts. And then miscellaneous revenue includes the sale of an asset. We had an energy trust rebate, and then we also had a dividend from SAFE. Looking at expenditures, I wanted to point out the community development is at 74% of budget. That's primarily due to capital projects not yet started. Engineering services had the savings due to vacancies.
And can I speak to that because it was a question earlier? We are also holding 2 FTE count in that pool because we want the director to be able to see what's missing for them before we place all the positions and not give them the flexibility. So we are holding a couple of positions, but right now we're able to deliver on our design review and we're able to deliver on our projects. So we've just held.
Moving on to facilities management, there's 62, they're at 62% of the budget currently. It looks like there's a savings, but actually that's related to the City Hall renovation. That project this room hasn't been started yet, and it's slated for later in 2019.
Yeah, so we are expecting to have council downstairs and the new chambers in September of 2019, and then we would be completed with the whole building by December.
Information technology is at 116% of budget. So usually in the beginning of the year, IT pays a lot of the maintenance fees for all of the computer software and programs that we have. That will start leveling out as the year goes by. And then non-departmental, it's also a similar situation. There's a lot of the liability insurance premiums get paid in the beginning of the year. And then those start leveling out as well. But the premiums were within budget. That's all for general fund. There's no questions on general fund. I'll move on to some of the other funds. Debt service fund is primarily within budget. There's not much really to report with debt service fund. The building fund continues to see an increase in revenue. So there's a lot of new residential and commercial development. That's why you're seeing the increase as well. And then as the increase in the revenue for the building comes up, you also see the corresponding increase in metro excise tax as well.
And just so people remember, the building official office went from 2 FTE to 3. So we're fully staffed at that office right now.
Lastly, there was also some additional contracted expenditures that went out due to increased demand. So that's why that's 173% of materials and services.
So this money that's in the building fund has to be used for building fund purposes, or?
Yeah,
That's correct.
but we have ebbs and flows with building, as you know, and
Right.
so this gives us some ability to make sure we protect the staff that we've got when things slow down a little bit.
5 years ago, it was barely operating.
5 years ago, I think we were
Flush.
supplementing
Yeah.
the budget. But, the goal is that it's so hard to hire staff into these departments that you don't want to just have them leave during a downturn. So creating a consistency and allowing them that flexibility through the booms and the busts is really important to us.
Okay, moving to the library fund. The biggest points here is the investment earnings. That's related to the increase in the interest as well as it's the interest earned on the bond proceeds mainly. And then also under capital outlay, that is the $793,000 that we have spent year to date, as of second quarter, is all the library project.
And that is on schedule.
Okay, and the transportation fund, this includes the SSMP, the SAFE program, and the state cast tax program. Interest revenue is increased, and that's also related to the bond proceeds. And then the transportation bond proceeds of $20 million occurred in fiscal year 2019. And then I also wanted to make sure to point out the interest rate on the bonds, because that was a question from last time. It is between 3.5% and 5%. It varies over the life of the bond. I don't have anything else on the transportation bond. I can move over to the utility funds. If there's any other questions, other utility funds. The water fund is on track. There's not much really to report on the water fund. Projects haven't quite started yet. That's why there's a savings in capital outlay. But those are slated for later in the fiscal year when the weather warms up. The wastewater fund is also on track. We do make payments in the wastewater fund, and that occurs in September and March. So that you'll see that payment in this quarter. And then stormwater fund is also similar, as well as the SDC fund. There's projects that haven't completed yet. So really the second quarter is quiet. And then the last two funds I wanted to point out is the Affordable Housing Fund and the URA Fund. The Affordable Housing Fund is actually doing well. We're over projected budget at $214,325. So, yeah, so we're doing pretty well with the Affordable Housing Fund. And then the URA fund is on track. So those are property tax money that we receive as well in the URA fund for that area. And those funds came in the last quarter.
So on the Affordable Housing Fund, I'm not too versed on this, the first line development incentives. We had a budget of 144 and we've already got 214. So
Right, and that's related to a lot of the development that's happened in the past year.
So we're just seeing a lot more development than we had expected.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So.
Well, good.
Do you have a question? Any other questions? Or if you come up.
I'm a little confused, actually, by that. Dividing the line into 80% median income and 20% median income. That's how we, I mean, we might have divided it like that for programming, but did we divide it? I mean, that the tax is the same on everybody.
The tax is the same on everybody, but its uses are defined. So we put stipulations on how the expenditures could happen. My guess, and without Alma here, I will get it wrong, so I don't want to go too far, but my guess is that we broke it in for expenditure purposes.
It's actually, if you remember, the tax on residential is one thing, which is it's the lower one. And the tax on commercial
Was higher.
development includes workforce housing. So
Right.
that's the 80%. And I think that was by state law.
I think the mayor's right.
Well, I mean, that makes sense under expenditures. I guess I just didn't remember it making sense.
You have to put it into kind of two pots.
Yeah.
Because you're only allowed to spend things certain ways.
Okay.
But Councilor Beatty, we can get you an update, but I do think the mayor's correct.
And then didn't you say that, I thought somebody told me that the urban renewal was actually low because of our vertical housing credit, but it's on track. It's not
We
really.
lowered what on track means. But it is on track. from that perspective.
Flexible track.
It was a flexible track.
Okay.
Okay, I wasn't going to go deep into the projects report, but if you have any questions, please feel free to let me know.
I'll also tell you that some of the SAFE projects and stuff, reading through it, look like they are actually behind on this sheet to what I have, so I'm happy to answer any questions about those too.
Okay, that's all I have.
And Bonnie, I do.
Agenda item 8, anything further to discuss?
Oh, I do. I have one thing.
All right.
So we've had a request to do a general 101 budget discussion training with this body. So we are planning on doing that in June, starting at 7:00 PM and going, so we'll start the meeting at regular time. As soon as the quarterly report is done and that general discussion is done, we'll bump into then a training that Bonnie and her team will lead. We're going to put 2 hours towards it. If we need more time after that, we'll do that. But we want to go through how to read the general budget book. What is how are we financing things? I think it's an important conversation for us to have just across the board so that people know where they have choices. So Bonnie's working on the curriculum for that now. If you decide you don't want to be a part of that, you don't think it's going to be as helpful for you, feel free to let us know in advance, and we can make the group smaller, and we'll only print out materials for individuals who are interested.
Do you have a date set for that?
Yeah, it is the third Monday. It's May.
It's
You said June.
Second? I'm sorry, it's May.
It should be May.
It's May. 22nd?
I think it's the 22nd. That sounds about right.
It's the third Monday,
The 20th. May 20th.
20th.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And we're hoping to get somebody from the Department of Revenue actually here to help with that presentation, so that'd be very useful to get some insight from them.
If you have questions that you want to make sure we address in that training, please let us know and we can include those.
Right.
We've had a lot of turnover, and since I've been here, we haven't done any sort of training around how to read a budget book and how to be involved, truly involved in some of the questions and answers that we're giving, so.
So that's on the regular budget committee meeting that we already have scheduled.
Yeah, we're just going to continue it far later, so it'll probably go till 9 o'clock. If it's like tonight, we would start at 6:30, we'd be done by 8:30. Does that work? Okay.
We could always start.
It's easier than trying to get this group together on different nights.
We could always start earlier.
We had a hard time getting everybody here tonight.
We-
Yeah.
Well, there are some of us that would, embrace
Retirees.
that.
Okay, then that's it.
All right, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
To adjourn.
I'll second.
Moved and seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Carried.
Thank you.